Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to be here with our guest, Carol Kruse. I met Carol a few years ago now, and after I learned about your background, I knew we had to get you on here. Carol had done a few startups, I think at least 3 startups, one of which she co-founded and then was bought by Coca-Cola, where you became the VP of marketing, and then went on to be the CMO of ESPN, which I think is just about the coolest thing. I'm a big fan of ESPN. One of the biggest reasons I wanted to get you on here is because after we were talking, I realized that you had hired all these small agencies, which is exactly who we work with. And so there's so many insights for you to share, and we're excited to have you.
Great. I'm excited to be here.
I think one of the big things that everybody's going to want to know is, how or why did you end up working with these small agencies?
Well, a couple reasons. One is I don't care about the agency size. I care about the quality of work. And I think small agencies tend to be more scrappy, more innovative, more willing to try new things, less risk adverse, and can hire some really amazing talent. I think some of the bigger agencies are wonderful as well. For me, I was at Coca-Cola. I worked across all the brands. I was head of digital for North America and then head of digital for global. So I worked across all brands. I worked with the brand managers and doing all their digital marketing, media buying, media creative, websites, mobile, social, etc. And I was doing that at a time when this was all emerging. And so I did a lot of firsts. And when you're a big brand like Coca-Cola or Sprite, it's not unusual to do a lot of firsts. Coca-Cola likes to be innovative. And I found that working with small agencies, we're on the leading edge of innovation. So that's one reason. The other reason is because I was a small company and we ended up doing work for Coca-Cola as one of their small kind of agencies or providers. And so I was that small company working for the big company beforehand. So I have a very soft spot. That was me. And I really like then helping small agencies as well. And I guess those are both the reasons, just really great talent and innovation and drive and not doing the formulaic thing. And then having been a small agency, of course, I like to support the small folks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to dive into that because I think, the prospect of working with Coca-Cola seems so daunting, or,
Right.
with or any of these large companies. You've talked a little bit about how you made that happen. And I think agencies, they have no idea, how do we even get our foot in the door? So how does an agency get recognized by a big brand?
I think because I was doing a lot on the leading edge of digital, mobile, social, et cetera, that I went to a lot of conferences. There were events that I went to. It was called iMedia and the iMedia Brand Summit. And that brought together brand marketers, I call us buyers, right? And then technology companies, agencies, small media companies. And, yes, I got to go for free. They all paid to be there, but we were learning together. And so this was a place where, yes, I was getting sold to, but I was used to that. You work for the Coca-Cola Company, everyone's kind of selling to you. But I really got a chance to meet these folks, and they became my friends. We were creating new things together. And so I felt like my big agencies and the big Coca-Cola agencies did some really awesome creative work, some great media planning. But again, the more innovative work was being done by these small groups, whether it was a technology company, creative agency, media agency. And so that's how I met them. I go to events and people would come up and we'd start talking. And, I think people believe like, I'm going to go to this event. No one from Coca-Cola is going to talk to me. And, I don't think that's necessarily true. I wasn't the only one at the company talking to small agencies or small tech companies. The same thing happened at ESPN. ESPN loved working with smaller tech companies, especially in the mobile space. The downside with, for when you're the big company is the minute you start working for small companies, they get bought, which for your customers, that's a good thing. A lot of times you'd like to get bought by a bigger agency, for instance. And then my little small scrappy agency got bought by the big agencies. And so I was happy for them. for the entrepreneurs. But then they were no longer my little agency.
Yeah. Would a lot change once they got bought, I'm assuming?
Well, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So conferences seem like one of the best ways to get in front of the bigger brands, which is interesting because, we go to a conference every year, at least one, and it's daunting walking up to someone that you don't know and starting that interaction. And I think one story you mentioned is what not to do at a conference. And I just feel like you have to share that because it's such a wild story.
Yeah, well, one of the problems is when you're at a conference like that, people know, oh, here's the, M&M Mars, here's the Procter and Gamble, here's the Coca-Cola person, right? Same thing happened at ESPN. And so they're all trying to meet you. And invariably, I might get up to go to the restroom, and women would follow me right into the restroom wanting to pitch me. And so, I'm going to just give everyone some advice. Don't do that. It is effective. You get the person alone, but it's rude.
Yeah,
So I would
that's crazy.
say, invariably, I would say, meet me outside and 5 minutes, 5 minutes. We can talk for 5 minutes. And my big advice is if someone says, I'll talk to you for 5 minutes, make it work. And so often people would start their pitch at A, B, C, D, like they were walking through a deck. And I was like, your 5 minutes is up. I don't even know what you do. What's your unique selling proposition? And they didn't target what they were saying to my business. A couple times I said, you're giving me a generic pitch. Do you know what my company does? And they kind of look at me and they're like, well, yeah, you sell beverages. I'm like, yeah. So tailor your pitch to what I'm trying to do is sell more beverages. I said, my business is really easy to understand. A lot of businesses aren't, but people should tailor the pitch to what that person's business goals are. And if you're not sure and you're talking to someone, ask a question like, what are your biggest marketing challenges? Or, oh, well, it's retention, or I get it's repeat purchase, or it's word of mouth. I mean, my suggestion is find out what their challenges and business problems are, and then tailor what you're saying to how you might be able to help achieve those goals.
It's the same thing with sales, right? Like if you send out one generic email, the chances of getting a response at this day and age is almost nothing. You have to get more specific now. Yeah. And especially if you're in person. But I also can't imagine, I have a hard time walking up to somebody at a conference, let alone following them into the bathroom. So that story is just wild to me.
I mean, it's effective because they get your attention, but not all attention is good attention.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, so with those pitches, what types of services do they generally pitching when someone comes up to you at the conference? Is it?
Yeah. And some of it, by the way, is not a differentiated. So they might have been a creative agency. And so in my case, we worked with the White and Kennedys of the world, right? For the big agencies for creative, but they were really behind on digital creative. And so I didn't want to work with them, much to our big agencies' chagrin, because I found that the smaller agencies were much more creative and really understand how to get the most out of technology and just were unique. They were a little more savvy. And some of those folks were in Europe, and I worked with some agencies who were in Europe because, right, mobile was in Europe, for instance, so much longer. And so I would work with those agencies because they were ahead of what we were doing in, say, the US. And so that's why I worked with them, is they were smaller, scrappier, they were on the leading edge, and we tried things. We tried a lot of stuff. Half of them failed. That's okay. We all learned, right? And so it was a very good partnership. And what I really liked is I didn't have the hierarchy of the big agencies. I didn't have 5 levels of management. Frankly, it was far less expensive because I didn't have, a VP who was billing at, $500 an hour. And so even with the small agencies, I'm like, I don't need your creative director in all our meetings. I don't need that. Those were some of the differences, is being scrappy, trying things, not worrying about like my reputation's tied to this. This is all Sprite's reputation, and just create partnership without some of the politics in big agencies, some of the hierarchy. and quick, nimble. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they sound like startups, which is pretty much what they are. And so I'm assuming, were you mostly working with the founders directly of these agencies a large percentage of the time?
Certainly initially.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, let's say a junior salesperson's like, I talked to Carol Kruse at the Coca-Cola Company and all the brands. And so she said that, she'd love to learn more about us. Of course, the founder was there, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And depending on the founder, if the founder added a lot of value and wanted to be there and we were creating new things together, great. It depended what the founder's role was. If the founder was the business side, I wanted to work with a creative director, right?
Yeah.
Again, I just didn't like the formality. And I think the small agencies realized I didn't need the formality. I didn't need, I just wanted to really do good work.
Mm-hmm.
And then my team, then I started with my team, same thing, respect the agencies, make sure they get paid quickly. That was the other thing. I'll get back to that. Just give them as much information, let them do great work. So those were some of the things. And I hired people who hadn't, some of them came from agencies and went client side, which I think the grass is always greener, right? When you're on the client side, you're like, God, it'd be so much better to be at an agency. When you're on the agency side, it'd be so much better to be on the client side. And I had done both at that point. And I don't know, I think it's easier to be on the agency side sometimes because the amount of corporate processes and the internal selling is very time consuming.
Yeah. I mean, again, big companies, there's probably a lot more red tape,
Yeah. Well, now the procurement process. So there's a couple things. Let me share a couple hints and things. So one thing is from a small agency, getting to the person and showing the attention. So my number one thing is when you get a chance to pitch or even just talk at an event or get invited then to pitch, really make it brief and very targeted and very focused. And the PowerPoint March of Death, as I always call it, where you start with this is who we are, and then you have that logo slide, and then it's like flip that upside down. And I always say, I don't care how you started and who you are and what your logo slide is until I understand what awesome work you could do with me.
Yeah.
And so, that traditional agency pitch, the great stuff's at the back, I always think. So show me the work you've done. Start there. Then I see what you've done. I can imagine the possibilities for what that would mean for my brands. But start there.
And then you care about who they are.
Then right? I want to know who you are and who you worked with and where you came from. But, if you're a tech agency, wow me with what your technology could let me do.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to care. And the other thing is, I think people, a lot of times, you got like a half an hour. It's not long enough. Again, I was that small company. It's not long enough. So make it work and try to stop the little chit chat at the beginning. I know you want to build rapport, but jump in and wow me. And then people, all of a sudden, that half-hour meeting, sometimes it ends up, being 45 minutes because they're interested. So that's my whole thing, is kind of flip those presentations upside down.
Again, I bring it back to the fact that sales now, they always talk about no one cares who you are at the beginning. If you send a message and, hi, my name is Ross at Clap, no one's going to read it. But if you say, this is what we do, then you have someone's attention. So it's so interesting that the in-person presentations match that. So
even more so. Yeah. Even more so. And, what I also love is people will reach out on LinkedIn sometimes, right? And they've said, I saw that Diet Coke ad, or I saw that program, that online program you're using, and letting people use Coca-Cola assets and not being afraid of generative AI and letting people play with them. That's amazing. I think we could do that this way with my technology and pitch an idea that gets my attention, because it's not a generic, this is what I do. It's, I've thought about your brand or your company or your service, and my technology or my creative or my social expertise, this is how I could help. Give an idea that grabs someone's attention.
Yeah. And so you talked a little bit about the red tape here. And, I love that we've talked about, okay, how do you even get the attention? What do I say when I approach somebody?
Right.
How do I approach them? I know something that scares people is the buying cycle of working with on these enterprise deals. What does that generally look like? What can someone expect? I know often people have never even, filled out an SOW or, an RFP. What can they expect to what that process to look like? How long does it take? What should they be prepared for?
Yeah, you're right. It's painful.
Yeah.
It is painful. And a lot of times at big companies, you just can't get in because procurement's the lead, and procurement's just a big red brick wall, right? And there's a reason why. However, it also can stop companies from you working with smaller businesses. And so the reality is, if you get to not the procurement person, but the person we'll call it the brand person, for instance, or one of the tech leads, because you're more of a technical solution to their social marketing, for instance, whatever it is, then you need to get to that person. And then it's not the agency trying to get through procurement. You have someone, I'm going to push it through now, right? So I found this small agency, I'm going to push it through procurement. And that process can be difficult. And the biggest thing is indemnification. So this is what's very hard for small businesses, is big companies want you to sign these large indemnification agreements or have indemnification insurance. Well, as a small agency, you don't have $1 million of indemnification insurance because your agency isn't worth it and you don't have it. But so those are some of the things that really are challenges, is who has legal liability on things, which seems crazy because if you're doing advertising, but some of those items are the challenges. And so understanding what those might be and being ready for it, because you're going to work with legal and you're going to work with procurement. And again, sometimes it's a question of compromise. But if your champion is there to help push that through, that's good. That is where, if you break in with a more junior person in the company, they're going to bring you to ultimately their manager or the boss. The boss is the one who's going to have to push it through and help work with procurement and legal.
Wow. So it sounds like you really, if you want to make this happen, you have to have a champion on the other side to do it.
Totally. Now, I was super fortunate because the procurement person who I started working with had worked with fleets, the Coca-Cola trucks and fleets in procurement, but he really wanted to do something different. And they were like, why don't you go work with this girl, Carol Kruse? She's doing all this crazy new digital stuff. We don't really know that much about it. He's like, yes, I want to learn something new. So he was so interested in learning something new. And then he became a champion of the small company as well. And Coca-Cola benefits from these small companies. So that's great. The other thing is all these bigger companies have diversity goals. And so if you happen to have an agency and your founders are people of color, if you are veterans, military veterans, if all the diversity, DEI, that is a big opportunity because that's really important. We were seeking out and trying to find these companies who would help us have a more diverse group of agencies and technology providers. We wanted that. It was harder to find. So there's that side too. So let's say you're an agency and you're military veterans. Well, the other way in is through their DEI groups. So that is another way in. If you are a company that is, very diverse, for instance, or whatever that is. So that is another really strong opportunity area. And then some companies do actually try to focus not only on the large, but small businesses, and understand that you want to help grow small businesses.
I mean, it's so awesome to hear that Coca-Cola is actually looking for these options. These large brands are looking for these smaller agencies that are more diverse. I mean, I can't tell you how many agency owners that I could probably talk with that would think it's not even worth trying to get a hold of Carol. It's not even worth trying to get a hold of these companies because there's no way they're ever going to go with me. So to hear that the companies are actually actively looking
Absolutely.
for them, I
A-
mean,
ev-
that's what people need to hear, to
abs-
know that you have a chance, go do it, go to
yes.
a conference. And speaking of which, because I know that all the questions are going to be, well, how, even at a conference, how do I know who to approach? Did they set up meetings with you beforehand? Did they just look you up on LinkedIn? How do they know that you were going to the
I
conference?
think they did their research and knew what I looked like,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Figure out what people look like. Everyone wears a name badge. A lot of times, there is a list of people there. Um, break in, say hello, introduce yourself, right? People at big companies, are used to being sold to, right?
Yeah.
And most people are really nice and not jerks. Now, a few are, but if you just introduce yourself, that's part of when you go to a conference, that's part of the game, right? That is part of it. Yes, I want to watch the speakers, I want to learn. But if what you introduce yourself and say is something that person's going to learn, did you know? But I don't know. Did you know? Or we did this really creative idea, or I'm really, I'm really interested in how. Do you think Midjourney is going to be an issue? How are you thinking about that? Break the ice,
Hmm.
and then say something that's unique and different, and why again that might be value to that person. Tailoring, and you've got to do that on the fly. You don't know who's going to be there, but you probably aren't going to say the same thing to someone who's PG company, right? Like Coca-Cola versus ESPN versus a tech company.
Yeah. I mean, totally. And again, this is more reason to go and put yourself out there and actually approach
Yeah.
people at these conferences, which is not something I'm good at. But it shows you why it's so important.
Yeah, and you got to find the extroverts
Yep. Yeah.
who like
Yeah.
doing that,
Yeah.
right? That's not your thing. I don't mind doing it.
Yeah. I believe that.
I
Yeah.
think that's the thing is, do you have the ability to make a connection with someone? Can you think fast on your feet to
Mhm.
make it relevant? I think that relevancy, not the canned pitch. The canned pitch is just, someone's eyes glaze over and it's an, you know, talk track that's just so canned that the listener doesn't want to hear it,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
One of the things about the reason I wanted to get you on here is I feel like you provide such tangible feedback. Sometimes the advice that people get is kind of pie in the sky and it's kind of hard to follow, but I feel like these are really tangible points that I hope people pick up and utilize. And, one thing that you mentioned is some of the minimum criteria, right? That you're going to need indemnification insurance that you mentioned. Is there anything else that you can think of that small agencies should be worried about, or traps they might fall into when trying to
Yeah.
work with big brands to make sure that they meet those minimum qualifications?
Yeah. Be prepared for how slow things are.
Okay.
It's painfully slow sometimes.
Yep.
I think the number one thing is understanding your person's what do they have to do. Understand the process. Like, put yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, gosh, why is Carol taking so long to get back to me? Well, because I want to do that, but now I need to get to my boss for approval. And then we have to get to legal, and then we have to have procurement. And so ask what the process is. Is there anything I can provide to you to help you sell this internally? Right. So remember that person is a salesperson internally. And so understanding what the process is, and is there anything you can do? Or when it gets to legal, what are the hangups, or what are the things I'm going to need to provide? And so that when that happens, there's not this, I had no idea I might need indemnification insurance, right? Just so I think at that point, you're kind of a partnership, because frequently the person you're working with, right, your hopeful client, has to do an internal selling process. and understanding what that is and what will they need from you.
Totally. Make their life easier.
Yeah. And also it makes your life easier, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But big companies are slow, and it's painful. It's painful. It was painful for me, the slowness, and it's painful in your small company because you want that business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's
And
game
then
changing.
sometimes the easier way in is to work through a bigger agency or through, sometimes they have entities who they have the relationship with Coca-Cola or ESPN, and you're going to be a subcontractor through that contractor. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're going to go in as a service provider to that group. And sometimes that's another agency. And sometimes that's, I don't know even what they're called. They just seem to be procurement groups, and they bring subcontractors in to do work. And sometimes that might be the easier way in. So at other companies, we would hire a lot of freelance creative, but we couldn't hire the freelance creative directly. So it was, there's a group that has a bunch of creative freelancers, and we had a legal agreement with that group, and we could bring in all kinds of freelancers. And so sometimes little small agencies can work through that way as well.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like there's multiple ways in as well, which is, I'm sure, really good to hear for people who are out there and want these opportunities. One thing before I let you go, I'm a big fan of ESPN, and I feel like you probably have so many good stories. It's hard to choose one, but I would love to hear just one of your favorite memories or stories just working at ESPN.
Well, I will say, I mean, first of all, if you don't like sports, that would be a problem. And
You're not like, yeah.
Okay, you're a woman, you came from Coca-Cola. How did you get the job? People always would say that. How did you get that job? And I was like, well, because I'm smart and I'm good at what I do, and I love sports just as much as you. But I think it was kind of insulting, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
That job? I'm like,
yeah,
because I'm qualified and I love sports, and I've done a ton of sports marketing in my career.
Yeah.
But so ESPN, it's brilliant people. You talk sports 24/7. I had 6 TVs in my office for every network. But really, my absolute favorite experience was I was able to take my family to the Women's World Cup in Germany, and to share what I worked on with my family, and get to go to all these sporting events was incredible. And representing the company there and being at those sporting events. I mean, that was a phenomenal part of being there. And then my coworkers, ESPN does hire the best, and my coworkers across the company were incredible. And no one ever leaves there. It was very hard to come in as a newcomer to be the CMO, because people have been there their whole careers, because you're at the pinnacle. If you want to do sports marketing, you're there. And so that's the hard part, though, to come in as a more senior new person, because you haven't been there forever. But the quality of people, the production is amazing. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, thank you so much for being on here. Honestly, there's so many tangible takeaways, and I'm so excited we got a chance to do this. And I know that there's a lot of value. So thank you again for.
Absolutely. And I really, for all your small agency partners, it's definitely possible. There are so many ways in. If you do really wonderful work and you can show how you deliver business value, and how you will work and provide something unique or different very quickly, succinctly, upfront, that's all you have to do.
There you go, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.